that they're promoting very strongly, and I'll include that in the chat also, for Varroa and how to treat for Varroa. My boss Barb in Columbus is not a big oxalic acid fan, only if they're needed. So she doesn't like to treat unless you got a high mite count, which we would test when I come out to do an inspection. The neat thing is, with summer solstice just passed by, June 21st, rumor says that queens that are generated after the summer solstice are less likely to swarm the following year. And with that in mind, it's a perfect introduction to John Schwartz. He's going to be telling us about on-the-spot beekeeping, OTS, where you can notch a frame and make queen cells and make happy hives. John lives in Solon with 6 kids. He has been out west in Oregon and also recently in Alaska, and we're glad to have him here in Ohio to present to us tonight. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Randy. I'll share my screen.
Perfect.
Here we go. Everybody see that?
Yes.
You're going to see the whole keynote screen, but I think it'll be fine.
We want to hear more about Alaska too. Yeah.
I loved Alaska. I wish we never left, but we needed to move, and God brought us this way. It's hard. It was hard on my wife, especially with the darkness and the cold and few people. So, but I love the mountains and the salmon fishing and all that. It's a really great place, nice and wild.
I was there last year and caught a lot of halibut and fish.
Oh yeah,
and we're still eating it. So.
Very good.
Yeah.
I think halibut's my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried a couple years doing bees there, and it's very difficult. You have a really short flow and little at that, and there's only a couple spots really that you can do bees well there. But I tried. So yeah, let's dive in. Kind of a high level view of this is just discussing how to efficiently increase your colonies. And I like to say, never buy bees again. That's a goal I have if I'm helping somebody new to the field of beekeeping, giving them tools to how to not have to spend hundreds of dollars every year, maybe every other year, recouping their losses. So that's what we're going to talk about. The slide you're seeing, you could email this out, Randy or Robert, later, but that's a link that will download the slides we're looking at tonight at bit.ly/Summit County. All right, so this is my family, 6 kids. This was a vacation in South Carolina we had a couple years ago. One of the boys is married now, and hopefully I'll be a grandpa soon. That'll be fun. So we've been here since 2012. We moved. I met my wife in Oregon. I was from Washington State. We've lived in Oregon, Washington, Texas, Alaska, and now here in Ohio. I started beekeeping. Oh, and that's a moose in my backyard when I was in Alaska. I missed the moose. 2 mooses are called moosin. That's a joke. I started in 2005 raising bees. I started with top bar hives, probably the most difficult way you could start, but that's par for the course for my life. But I had fun making top bar hives and learning what not to do with bees. And it's a steep learning curve with top bar hives. There's a lot of good resources out there though. I might do some of that in the future. So I'm not selling anything, just here to help, just a sideliner myself. I'm not claiming to be an expert, and I'm not claiming there's just one right way of doing beekeeping. So if you've got questions or pushback or different ideas, that's fine. Feel free to, as we go through this, just to jump in and interrupt and ask a question, or you could drop it into chat. I'll keep that open and look there if there's any questions from you, if you just want to type them in. So tonight we'll cover a few things, a strategy for increasing your colonies without spending money, of course, 3 problems and 3 solutions for those problems. We'll look at the strategies, those strategies in my apiary. The slides we'll look at tonight are the 2 years ago. I haven't updated this deck, but it's pretty similar year to year. And just to help you understand maybe from a different angle how the things I'm talking about play out in actuality throughout the course of the year, the beekeeping season. Then we'll talk about just 4 unrelated suggestions I've got if we have time, and then take any questions as well at the end if there's any left. So diving in, current realities, some things I hear from folks quite a few, quite often via email or the Facebook group that we've got are these. These are some of the phrases I hear often. It's hard keeping bees alive. I'm spending too much money. Should I be treating for mites? I need to buy bees again this year. I'm intimidated by the idea of raising queens. I lost all of my bees last winter. It's much harder to keep bees these days. That's the current paradigm. So because of that, many beekeepers are year to year or every other year or so buying queens or packages because they're just losing their bees or making mistakes. And when you do so, obviously those bees typically come from out of state if you're buying packages, for sure. Queens sometimes, new colonies of course are going to be local, but most folks are still buying packages. Also because of that paradigm, beekeepers are spending lots of money and not even breaking even. Yeah. Losing bees in the fall, winter, and even early spring is becoming more commonplace, and the cycle repeats. It's not a fun cycle to get into. And the goal is to be successful and break out of that cycle and not buy bees any longer and actually enjoy beekeeping again. So some of the problems, there's three buckets of problems that for me are the core reasons behind the symptoms. One, I think not enough, and these are learned things. This isn't stuff I've come up with, but things I've read, learned from others. Number one is losing bees to swarms. And I used to lose lots of bees to swarms every year. And they're fun, but they're costly as you think about it. They weaken your colony and maybe even destroy it. You're losing a queen that maybe you paid for. You're losing bees, of course, maybe up to half your bees or more, and they take a lot of honey with them, and just a loss of time, and ultimately it's expensive, and it gets expensive quick. A second bucket of problems we'll talk about is folks just aren't raising their own queens, their own bees. And I used to also buy bees most every year, every other year, and that pushed me into reading and thinking outside the box a little bit, especially when I moved here to Ohio and met some different folks. When you're not raising your own bees, you're dependent on others, and you're taking part in a genetic bottleneck. So you've got a small handful of queen and bee producers in the nation that supply the bulk of the bees to most people, most beekeepers, and that's just a very narrow genetic bottleneck that most beekeepers are taking part in. Not saying that those bees are bad, it's just it's very limiting. So when you're doing that, also you're working on their timetable, their schedule, not yours. So that forces us, of course, to go out of state for bees that are raised in time with the weather to meet our needs. So of course, queens are often from out of state. There's no guarantee as to the quality of those bees, those queens, or the longevity. And if your experience is like mine, when you buy packages or queens, definitely you're not going to see 100% success rate. And often they're going to abscond or replace that queen, or they're poorly mated. There's a lot of different things that can happen. And so that all combined gets expensive quick. The third bucket of problems is losing bees to mites. And it's still, in my book, probably the most fundamental issue for beekeepers, keeping them from being successful. when I was in Oregon, it was back in 2005, 6, and a little bit later, I didn't worry about mites. It wasn't as big an issue there yet. But when I came to Ohio, that changed. I used to worry about mites quite a bit, and I still think it's the #1 issue. We all have mites all the time, every colony, just a matter of how many of them. And over time, over the course of a season, even just a few weeks' time, you can see a colony get weakened by the mites, and then they get sick, and then you've got crawling bees and deformed wing virus and all kinds of issues that are caused, even absconsion, etc. when you've got weak bees. And so mites have got to be addressed, or you're going to lose your colonies. Got to have a plan. And instead of healthy hives, many are commonly battling weakness and dwindling. That's just common. And I think a lot of the time folks are dealing with mites and they don't realize it. They're seeing sickness and they think they're not attributing that to mites. So that's 3 problems. Let's talk about 3 strategies. But first, I wanted to make a mention of Mel Dissicone. This is a picture of him up in Michigan. And he wrote the book OTS Queen Ring. And he has a little website, mdasplitter.com, where you can get that book. I'm not selling it for him. I'm just passing along the info. This is where I learned what you're going to learn about from me this evening. And it's really easy methods that anyone can learn. The book is expensive, but it's worth every penny from my perspective. So don't be shocked when you see the price. So after reading Mel's book, that was back in 2012 or so, I met him at the Tri-County Bee Convention down in Worcester. At his little table, he's there every year. You can meet him. He's a nice fellow and likes to talk about bees. Since reading Mel's book, I've been able to keep my bees in my yard, so no swarming. I've raised hundreds of my own quality queens that produce well, just as well as any that I buy from a professional producer. I've sold over 150 nukes in the last few years, and I've been able to mitigate the mites. You're never going to get rid of mites, but you just need to mitigate them. And I've got healthy bees, and I'm supporting and being part of the local genetic solution for beekeeping. So in my little neck of the woods, I'm doing my part, and you guys can too. Also, some of my experiences since reading that book, I'd guess on an average annual loss rate, I'd see about 25 or 30% annually loss. And I don't worry about that much loss. I'd rather see 10%, but because of the way I've changed and do things, losses don't mean much anymore. I'm able to recoup those losses very quickly, and you'll see how. I've got so many bees, I'm able to help others. I just got rid of 10 hives for maybe half the cost a couple weeks back. I just got too many bees and wanted to downsize a bit, so I just got rid of those and able to help out other beekeepers, or with a brood if they need to frame a brood, or queens sometimes. I've got plenty of resources, as Randy mentioned. Having available resources in your apiary with additional colonies is just a gold mine. It's so important. We'll talk about that a little bit. The book's name is, I'll back up a slide. Someone's asking, OTS Queenery, and that's the cover. OTS Queenery from Mel Dissicone, and we'll send these slides out again, so don't worry. Other experiences, I'm able to be really ruthless with weak colonies. If I've got a mean colony or a queen that's just not producing, certainly a lane worker colony, I just get rid of them. I just cut my losses, and I don't waste a second of time with those bees. I don't want to support weakness or sickness or anything like that in my bees. I only want the best of the best producing year to year, and over time that has results. That's exponential. That really helps you. Because I'm able to, and you can as well, multiply your bees very quickly, you can be more ruthless. You don't have to worry about the value of a queen or a colony any longer. It's more about how much space and time you've got to deal with bees. So I always have young queens and bees going into winter. It's vital these days with the disease, pesticides, and mite pressures. It's just really important, and that paradigm seems to work year to year for me. I actually make some income and actually enjoy beekeeping again. It's a lot of fun when there's not too many bees. I had way too many colonies and I've downsized this year just to my backyard, and I've really found it enjoyable again. So that's fun. Okay, first strategy, number one, let's dive in on that. Preventing swarms. What is that? How do we do that every year? First, a quote from the Beekeeper's Handbook, 4th edition. That's a really good book as well. I really appreciate that book. It's well done. Says this: swarming was once considered a sign of good and productive beekeeping, for the beekeepers could increase their holdings from the numerous swarms available. There's some fascinating videos out there on that from about straw skeps and such. Logs, other types of cramped hives have been used to house bees since the 1600s, but these containers quickly became overcrowded and thus promoted the swarming of bees. Today, swarming is viewed as a sign of a beekeeper's negligence. It sounds a bit harsh, but I think it's true. Because it means a loss of both the bees and the production of honey. And here's the quote I want to zero in on. Although most beekeepers make efforts to prevent or control swarming, it's not an easy task. And that's so true. It isn't an easy task. And I think that's the case because of the way folks are going about it. It's not easy to prevent if you're just sitting back and watching it. And then when you see them getting into swarm behavior, trying to slow it down or stop it altogether, it's just really difficult. Lots of intensive things like swapping comb and boxes and throwing in queen excluders, etc. And as someone mentioned in the comments, this year was an amazing swarm year. And if I hadn't been putting my processes into practice, I think every hive would have swarmed at least once already. And I'm seeing such strong colonies this year already that I think a second swarm season is pretty imminent if you're not doing something to stop it. So it's even more difficult to stop once it started. I mentioned that. So what do? This is what we do. The strategy defined summary. In summary, 1 week before swarm season, we make an artificial swarm. And what was, if someone would chime in the notes, what was the kind of the swarm date for you guys a little bit south of me this year? Was it mid-April?
I would agree with that. Yes. Even it's still going on now, really, though.
Yeah, it really hasn't stopped. Yeah, it's been a strange year, strange spring, and then a really intense buildup for whatever reason. Strange, but typically for me in Solon, it's about end of April, May 1st, right in there. It was very early this year, mid-April. I mean, actually swarm season was about the end of April. I split or did the artificial swarms in mid-April this year. We'll get into that. So we make an artificial swarm. I'll show you what that means in a bit. This is happening before the swarm impulse begins. So usually I'm doing this before they're even building cups. They might be starting to build cups. So you, as a beekeeper, it's just something that you learn slowly over the years to figure out when is swarming this year. It's always different, but it's generally in a certain time frame. I typically like to look at dandelion blooms. The first healthy dandelion bloom, I know about 3 weeks later, you know, all things being equal, is swarm season. That's just really rough. There's other ways to go about it. On my blog, I've got a whole post on different ways folks do that. Some look at apple blossoms. Some look at hummingbirds lately. When hummingbirds show up, it's about to be swarm season. There's a lot of different ways that you can pick that work for you. In the meantime, I think that's the benefit of having a group like Summit County Beekeepers. You can be talking amongst each other, learning from those that have been around the block. But regardless, I switched to this idea of artificially swarming a week ahead of swarm season about 8 years ago after reading Mel's book. And I've done this on hundreds and hundreds of colonies, and it works 99% of the time. And we're just talking minutes per colony to do this, especially as you get the hang of it, understand the concepts, really are familiar with bee biology. It really just clicks and makes a lot of sense. But even if you're a new beekeeper, the steps are pretty simple. As long as you have a little bit of help, you can get through this even alone with your colonies. So here are the steps to an artificial swarm. Let's just assume I'm going to be doing this starting May 1st, and that I think swarm season is going to be May 7th. Okay, so I'm about a week ahead of the swarm season. On May 1st, I'm in my apiary, and step one, I'm looking at an overwintered colony. We'll just talk about one colony, and I'm going to open that colony up and do an inspection, and I'm going to pull out an artificial swarm out of that colony. I'm going to make a nuke, basically. I'm going to look for the queen. That's the most important part. Of course, you're going to find her with eggs that time of year. She's pretty easy to find in the early spring. And you're going to set her aside and put her in a nuke box. You're going to give her 2 frames of capped brood. You're going to give her a couple of shakes of extra nurse bees. You're going to give her a frame of drawn comb if you got it. You probably will that time of year. And then you wrap up that nuke. If you can put it into a single deep and just put that nuke, that swarm, artificial swarm in the center of the deep and fill in the extra 5 frames on the outside, even just foundation. And you've made, you've basically made, you've artificially swarmed and you've kept the bees in your yard. It's pretty fascinating if you think about it. It's a lot of fun. Now you can sell those nukes, which I do, or if you're interested in increasing your colonies, that they're going to be full strength a month or 2 later. They really ramp up faster than you would imagine, even with just that limited amount of brood and bees. Now, this also works because you're giving the colony capped brood. You don't want to give them uncapped larvae or eggs, because they need a lot more bees to take care of those eggs and larvae than they do capped brood. Nurse bees can manage twice the amount of brood as they can, capped brood as they can eggs and larvae. It's just the way they roll. And so it doesn't take much, not many bees. You just need that queen, enough feed. And if a cold spell occurs, which it did this year, and I should have done this, I forgot, I lost a couple. You can take a double screen and put it on top of the original colony and put this nuke on top of that, keep the bees separated, and the nuke can absorb the heat from below from the larger queenless colony. So that's just something to keep in mind. Anyways, step 2, on May 1st, at the same time, in that queenless colony, you've now basically created a cell builder. So if you are a queen producer, or if you graft queens in your yard, you know what this means. You make a mature colony with lots of bees, queenless, give them lots of feed, and you graft your cells and put them in there, and they'll raise queen cells. Well, we don't need this colony to make a lot of queen cells. We just need this colony to make 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 4 queen cells. They'll make more than that, but that's all we need. And so in that original mature colony, it still has most of the brood, it has most of the bees, it just doesn't have the queen. We're gonna notch below 36-hour or less larvae on a couple, 2 or 3 frames. I'll show you what I mean by notching, but basically we're breaking the cell wall away underneath the tiniest larva that there is on that frame. And you can tell 36-hour or less larvae, they're usually near eggs, eggs that are still standing up at the bottom of the cell. And they're just in a tiniest pool of royal jelly. They've just laid over, the eggshell is just dissolved, and they've laid over in that royal jelly, and they're like a little tiny comma. If everyone could mute, that'd be great. Somehow somebody's off of mute. So you're gonna do this on multiple frames, because a week later, we're gonna come back, and having cells, queen cells built on multiple frames gives us options to make additional splits. And I'll give you some visuals on that. But that's basically it. You wrap up those 2 colonies. You now have 2 colonies in the yard. You can keep them right together. You don't have to move them anywhere. Because the artificial swarm, the nuke or the start, whatever you want to call it, has mostly nurse bees, they're not going to fly back to the parent colony. They're going to stick with that brood and with that queen. There's a lot of impulse for them to stay with that colony. I really don't ever see issues keeping them in the same yard. So to reiterate visually, looking at May 1st, there's your queen right overwintered colony. This is 1 week before swarm season. This colony needs to be strong enough just to qualify this. This needs to be a mature, disease-free colony that's growing fast. Like they typically, if they've made it through the winter and they're growing fast, they're typically the right type of colony to do an artificial swarm. But you can define it by this. It needs to have at least six frames of brood. And one of those deeps needs to be full of bees at least. And if you've got that, you've got enough bees to do that artificial swarm. So that's the qualifier. So then you're pulling out the queen right, the queen with a couple frames of brood, extra frames of honey and pollen, if there is any, and extra frames to fill in the gaps. And you're putting that off to the side, and you now have a queenless cell builder next to it, okay? All right, step 2. There's 2 steps. I like to do this on Saturdays. I got time, so May 1st, let's just call it the first Saturday. A week later on Saturday, on May 8th, I have a couple more steps to do to complete the process of that artificial swarm. The first step, I'm gonna quickly go and look at that queen right nuke just to make sure they haven't absconded or there's an issue or they need some bees shook in with them. Sometimes there's an issue. It's rare, but it happens. So it's good to check that nuke. It's also good just to leave these bees alone for the week, FYI. Just stay out of them. You'll be tempted to take a peek and see if they're building the cells. Just that poses more risk and issues than might return benefit for doing so. So just leave them alone for the week and come back the next Saturday, look at the queen right nuke, make sure she's fine. Then go back, step 2, to that queenless cell builder. And you're gonna find queen cells. It never grows old. Every time I open up a colony, it's just amazing to find these well-built, fully capped queen cells just a week later, just a miracle. So you're gonna go in and do a careful inspection because it's really easy to, of course, rip apart queen cells or to just shake them too hard or whatnot. You're really doing a very careful, very slow inspection. And being careful to pull out a frame and the edges first to create space, of course, and slowly moving things apart. And what you're doing is you're looking for those queen cells. And it just depends on your goals. If you're wanting to expand your apiary, this is the perfect time to split this into 2. Sometimes to split this into 3 if you've got enough bees and brood. And I typically want to have, just like that original nuke, a couple of frames of brood, of cap brood for each start at least. For me, I typically don't do many splits because I don't need any more bees and I'm just culling down the queen cells. You only want to have 1 to 2 cells per start that you create. Each split only needs 1 to 2 cells. If you leave them with more than 1 or 2 cells, you might have issues. Actually, you will have issues with queens fighting and casting off swarms with virgin queens, and it just creates a mess. You don't want queens fighting. You want just the 1 or 2 nicest looking cells to hatch out. And the first queen that hatches out, typically she'll destroy the other cell and she'll go and get mated. So visually, just reiterating what we did here on the second weekend on May 8th, you come into your yard and you have that queen right nuke on the right, and on the left you've got that queen cell builder. You're going to go in, do an inspection, and split up the resources. If you're doing splits, into 2 or to 3 if you've got enough and you've got enough equipment, and you're leaving just 1 or 2 cells per start. Now, typically, you're putting you want to keep things together the way a bee colony works. The brood in the middle, then the extra open comb, then pollen, then honey, and then extra frames of foundation. So you want to keep things together and centered in each of those starts. Then the fun part, if I did the artificial swarm on May 1st, 30 days later, on June 1st, I've got 3 or 4 queen right colonies, which is amazing. And you'll feel really proud of yourself when you do this the first time. You've raised your own queens, you've raised your own bees. They lay just as well as any you've bought. And you've created a scenario now in your apiary that gives you all kinds of options in case one of these colonies gets weak or diseased, or a raccoon knocked one over like mine this week, or you have some kind of issue, or you want to continue to grow your apiary. You have all kinds of options now. Any questions with that first idea of artificial swarming? I'll take a drink of coffee. Okay, good. Let's talk about the second strategy, the solution for the issues we've got with raising your own quality queens. Let's talk about that a little bit more closely. A few problems to reiterate: reliance on outside breeders, the complexities for most with grafting. I've done grafting, it's fun, but you need a lot of tools and time and extra equipment, and it's got its own set of issues. Most folks just never going to have the time or even skill to graft. It's not easy. It's a learned skill that can become simple, and you can get really quick at it. But most beekeepers simply just aren't going to get into grafting. Someone asked the question, how do you notch the cells? And we're going to talk about that right now. Good question. I'll show you exactly what I mean. Some other problems, some feel inadequate about the idea of raising quality queens. Don't listen to that lie. You can, it's easy. It just takes doing things the right way and working with the bees, not against them, and not taking any shortcuts. And if you do these steps when the weather's right and when your bees are strong, anybody can make really high quality queens. Buying bees, though costly, it feels like the easiest route, but really in the long term, it's hurting you by going out and buying bees. So we're going to keep talking about how to raise your own queens here. Here's a strategy to find. Rather than relying on purchasing bees and queens from others, you can instead raise your own quality queens and make splits as needed. It's not just about raising queens, but raising your own frames of brood, building out your own frames of comb, selecting for the kinds of bees that you like. It's fascinating that you can get really, the rabbit hole's deep with this idea. So how do we do that? And just basically the idea of notching, which someone just asked about. Just to clarify, when I mentioned the term OTS, it just means on the spot. And Mel Disicone, the author of that book, coined that phrase. His idea was, what is a way that any beekeeper, when they're in their apiary next to their colony with no extra tools, on the spot, create their own queens and their own bees. And he came up with this formula, this method of notching. After doing some reading from the old timers, actually Miller, Doolittle, and others were close to figuring this out, and it could have changed beekeeping a long time ago, but Mel's kind of put the pieces together. He didn't invent the idea, but he's kind of put it together in a way that makes sense, and coined the phrase, and it's showing people how to notch. So the idea, like we've said, is to make a colony queenless, and immediately take your hive tool and notch below 36-hour or less aged larvae. And this is what it looks like. Here is, hopefully you can see your screen's large enough. Here's the ideal larva. This one's just slightly old actually, but this is young enough. You can see just a tiny pool of royal jelly at the very bottom of that convexed part of the cell. The pool of royal jelly is just outside of the little larva that's laid down. This larva is a little bit older to the right. If you can see my mouse, I don't know if you can, but in the center of the screen is the perfect size. And when you take your hive tool on the right side of your screen here, you just jab it in straight. I have another picture I'll show you as well. You just put your hive tool straight in all the way to the plastic and then bend the wax down. You're actually breaking about 2 or 3 rows worth, flattening that out. And basically, it just, the bees are made, you know, their instinct and their DNA, when they go to make a queen cell, that's what they do. They start tearing out the cell and building it out. And when they see this extra space below the right age larva and the impulse is there because the pheromones have gone from the queen, they get in that mode of cell building, and they'll make 1 or 2 or 3 cells here if the larva is the right age. Sometimes they will repair this and just choose their own cells. Don't worry about it. Let them do it. This just gives you peace of mind and options on multiple frames to find queen cells, so you can break up your colonies into splits. Another picture, it's actually, when the comb is young like this, white or just, you know, slightly yellow, it's very easy to notch. And also, you don't need to worry about harming those little larvae when you're notching, because they actually, your hive tool can't reach those little larvae because it's down dipped into that convex of the cell. Your hive tool won't reach it, so you don't have to worry about damaging the larvae when they're this young. That's just a note. Here's another picture with older comb, and in the center picture of those 3, you can see the glistening cocoons. And so this is a brood comb that's gone through several cycles of raising bees, and when they pupate, they're creating a cocoon, and there's layers of that. It's minute, but it builds up over time. And so you have to kind of saw through that a little bit with your hive tool when you're working with older comb, especially if it's darker than this. This is kind of middle of the road comb, but you have to make sure you get all the way down to the back, to the foundation, and then you got to rip it down and make sure you really create enough space below those larvae. And then this is what those cells look like when you're done a week later. So hopefully that's enough visual for you to see, that to help you understand what that notch is. And it's really not complicated. It's so very simple. You just need a hive tool. You can even notch 1 or 2 cells with a stick if you wanted to, or a different kind of utensil if you want to bring it. But what I find is it really doesn't make a difference. They repair it so quickly. It's just no sweat for the bees. Just go in there and rip cells, no big deal. And sometimes you'll destroy a little bit of a brood or you know, existing drone comb or whatever. Don't worry about it. Just it's more important that you build a cell. So that's that. Here's a few OTS built queens from the last year, 2 or 3. They're just beautiful queens that you can raise in your own colonies. So some reasons why this works. Actually, I'm gonna skip this frame or this slide and just go to here. With the ability to make easy increase, so splitting your colonies at a reliable rate every year. And this is done in the spring, but it's also done a second time post solstice. We'll talk about that. I'll come back to the slide we just skipped, but there's 2 times of the year where I'm doing this OTS process. The first time is a week before swarm season. That's to prevent swarms, but it also helps with mites. We'll talk about that as a 3rd strategy. The second time we do OTS is around the solstice, which is right now. And you want basically, the marker is you want your queens to mate post solstice, so past June 21st. For whatever reason, when queens are mated post solstice, when they return to the colony and begin laying, the bees treat that queen differently than they do a more mature queen that's come through the spring and early summer season. They let her ramp up and lay eggs like a queen, a spring queen. It's amazing to see. So a lot of folks have troubles with the idea of doing splits so late in the season, or raising a queen so late in the season and having a brood break for 30 days in July. Are you kidding me? That sounds like a crazy idea, but I've done it now for 8 or 9 years. Every colony in my yard, I do this too. And by the time I get to goldenrod, I've got double deeps, sometimes triple deeps of bees, because they just act like a spring colony basically when they're mated post solstice. And I don't know why that is, just the way they are. This was discovered by either Doolittle or Miller. They noticed with bees that swarmed and then started laying in July that they ramped up quicker than the bees elsewhere in their yards. And that's where the idea, Mel kind of put this idea together with OTS and the idea of notching and kind of changing the paradigm of how we do beekeeping. Someone mentions in chat, does the location of the eggs and larvae determine where you notch, or do you wait to find an ideal location with the right age? Nope, you can do this anywhere on the frame. And you'll notice when they, if you see a colony get into swarming and they build cells, they'll build them wherever. Top, bottom, middle, it really doesn't matter. I think we feel like, because of all the reading we've done, that supersedure cells are inferior. If you see them, a cell in the middle of the frame is not going to be as good a quality queen as somewhere down below. And I just don't find that to be the case. It's just not true, at least in this scenario. So the larvae have to be, basically, to back up, bees are not going to typically try and make a queen cell out of a larva if it's older than 36 hours. They're looking for the right age larva. They know what the right age larva, it needs to be 36 hours or less. And they transition from that tiny larva to a little bit larger larva really quickly. So it's really easy to tell once you start to recognize what does the tiniest larva look like. Then it becomes old hat. You just see it right away when you're doing your inspections. Yeah. Someone else asked, can you notch under freshly laid eggs? You can. And some folks do that who have a hard time seeing. They just look for eggs and notch there. And I would say your rate of success for them to build a cell right there is less, but it's enough of a success rate that it would work for folks that have a tough time seeing, or they don't have a lot of time, just need to get it done. So yes, you can. Sometimes basically the issue there is sometimes they will repair that wax before they get into the impulse to raise the cell. That's the deal. What you also can do, a third option, and I often do this, is notch halfway between eggs and 36-hour or less larvae. You can find that on the edges of the brood circle. Usually it's out on the outer edges. You'll find the eggs, and then right next to that, the just hatched larva, and that's a perfect spot. And cover both of those with your notch is one way to do both. So looking at this slide, you have all the resources you need now that you can make increase. And here's the paradigm change. You just need to get one overwintered colony, or one colony through winter, okay? If you get one colony through winter, you can turn that one colony easily with this method into 8 or 9, even more colonies. If you're really aggressive with your splits and you're not grabbing honey, you can get very aggressive and increase that one into 10 or 11 in the course of a year if you're not selling it, or giving them away. So in March, if I have an overwintered colony and I artificial swarm in May, and by June 1st, I've got 3, and I can take those 3 and turn them into 9, 8 or 9 easily by August. Someone asked to notch versus not notching. Won't they make queens without the notch? They will. The issue is sometimes if you're wanting to do splits, then you're going to want a notch. on multiple frames. What that does is gives you cells on multiple frames so you can split. If you just let them pick and choose, sometimes they'll build all their cells on one frame. That's just the way they are. And then you've got fewer options to split. That's the main reason for doing these notches, is just giving you options to do splits. Sometimes I have seen, when I haven't notched, that they just didn't get a clue, and maybe it's because they didn't have a lot of brood and larvae to work with. Then you're taking a risk that they don't figure it out in time. That does happen, but rarely. So someone asked, you mentioned 3 good times to split: spring, summer solstice, and I don't know that I specifically meant 3. I'm sorry if I communicated that, but basically you can notch at any time when the weather's good for queen rearing. You've got at least 6 frames of brood, capped brood. That's basically the 2 options, and that you've got enough build-up time for the queen to get mated and return, and still have good breeding weather for having 3 cycles of brood. Basically, you want them to build up enough for fall. So you can split up to, I'd say, in our area, from middle of April until, at the earliest, you're going to deal with cold weather sometimes, but say May 1st until middle of July. Sometimes you can push it. We've had warmer falls the last decade, so it's not been as big of an issue. But you can basically notch when it works for you, and you've got time. You don't have to time it with all these. You do want to do it early to artificial swarm, but maybe that's not an issue. Or you don't need to worry so much about post solstice. Maybe you want to do all your splits in June. That's fine. There's just some reasons why you would want to do it early, and then right around middle of June for post solstice mating, to have enough time to build up for the fall and winter. Someone asked, can you do this with first year hives? I would say yes. Say if you get your colonies into about June 15th, end of June, like right now, and they've got 6 frames of brood, you've got a strong enough colony to do your split, your notching. No big deal. Okay, those are good questions. So I was doing some math. I was taking a nap. I was thinking one night or one day on a weekend, just thinking, how much could I turn my colonies if I really went aggressive and I had enough equipment. I came through the winter with 31 this year, or this was maybe last year, I don't remember. It all blends together, but I came through with 31 in March, queen right colonies. And if I did this kind of OTS notching splitting aggressively like I've showed you, I could turn this 31 into 242 by fall. And that's with 10% mating loss. That's something I haven't mentioned. When you do this, raising your own queens, you're going to see some failed matings. There's no way around it. Even the queen producers, that this is what they do full time, are going to see 5 to 15% mating losses. They may get eaten by a dragonfly or get lost, or just didn't make it to the happy mating grounds, whatever. You're just going to see some losses. Just bank on about 10% failure. If you're just raising 2 or 3 queens, you're probably going to see them all come back, both of them, or you're going to see half of them, 1 or 2 come back, and it's just the way it goes. So it does pay to have, I'd say, at least 4 or 5 colonies. I think is ideal, where you're not, where it just gives you options. And as you go into fall, you want to think through do your math this way. This is the way I do it. You think, okay, say I get worst case 40% loss. How many colonies do I need to go into winter to come out with to have on the other end? And all you need is just a handful. It just depends on what your ultimate goal is for that year. You just need a few, or 2 or 3 or whatever your goal is, and you know how fast you can split these up. Robert asks, is it fair to assume that if you split a hive 3 times that you will not be able to collect honey from any of the hives? Yeah, that's typical. I think what you'd find is you could harvest a frame or 2 from each of those if it's a good year. Like this year would not be an issue at all. You're gonna be able to harvest a little bit of honey. As well, this is just touching the surface of this paradigm. A lot of old-time beekeepers or folks that have been doing it a few years in the old paradigm think that if you do these splits, you can't get honey. And especially as we think about doing the artificial swarms early in the spring, the idea would be if you split them heavy, you're just not going to get honey. Well, the reality is you want to have the right number of bees, the high bee density, the numbers of bees in a colony at the right time, right during that flow. So what I do, if I was going to go after honey, if I had, say, 10 colonies, I would artificial swarm and I would have 20. But right before the flow, maybe you want to capture the basswood flow or the clover flow. I would recombine those all together and get back to 10, and I would have 10 monster colonies with more bees than I ever would have had if I just tried to keep those in as they were without splitting them, without artificial swarming them earlier in the spring. I hope that makes sense. We'll talk about treatment here in a bit. Someone asked about that. So it just depends on what your goals are. You can go really aggressive to increase your colonies. You can do a mix and go after honey and increase. You can go after all honey and just a matter of recombining colonies. And when you recombine, cull the queen that's not quite as producing quite as well as the other. So keep your genetics strong. You're going to see it's going to be obvious which queens are strongest, and keep those alive, kill the others, and recombine with newspaper. Someone asked, so when you recombine, do you keep the queens alive in smaller hives with minimal number of bees? I do that sometimes. I didn't this year because I just got too many bees. But in the past, you can take, say, especially in July, it's a little bit more risky for folks, at least they feel that way, to kill all your queens in July. I used to feel this way myself. And so I would try and keep them alive in small nukes. And I've learned that you can take that queen and a handful of bees, probably a shake of bees, a frame of bees, nurse bees are best, and put her in a little mating nuke with just a frame of honey and an extra frame of comb next to her. And that honey and those nurse bees, they'll keep her alive for the 30 days. And she'll actually turn that frame of honey into brood. And it'll give you an option. If your queen doesn't mate back at the parent colony, well, you can take that queen that you've set aside and recombine her with the colony with newspaper. And that does work most of the time. I find that after 2 or 3 years of doing this, it's no sweat. You will not feel the risk involved with off in all your queens. So like the last couple of weeks, my apiary had no queens in it, and they're all in the process right now as we speak of either building cells or they've emerged and gonna go out for their mating flights shortly. So I kind of staggered it this year. I didn't do them all at once. I'm learning in my old age to break things up. Okay, let's skip ahead. To these caveats because they're important. I want to make sure, and stop me if we run out of time. Only strong colonies can raise queen cells. You can't have small starts raising queens. The biggest mistake I see over and over again is folks not understanding that when you create these artificial swarms, you're moving the queen out into a small nuke. The remaining parent strong colony is doing the work of raising the queen cells. You can't flip that around. You can't take out and make a small nuke with nurse bees and make them do the work of raising the cells. You're never going to get a quality queen cell. They need a high density of bees and enough heat, etc., especially early in the year, to make a quality queen cell. So don't try that shortcut. You got to do it the proper way of pulling the queen out and making a small nuke with capped brood, and then the parent colony does the work of raising queen cells. You only want to notch when there's good queen rearing conditions for the upcoming week. So you're looking a week ahead. You want to make sure, for example, in the spring that the nights aren't getting into the 30s. 40s is okay, not ideal. 50s is perfect in the nights for us in late April, May. So you only want to notch when you've got that kind of weather. You've got live drones early in the spring. You've got enough feed in that colony. And obviously you've got enough brood in a queen. So you want to make sure that you're not doing any kind of a shortcut here with the queen rearing conditions of your colony. And then, as I mentioned, you're going to see 10% loss. That's a caveat. Proper notching is required. You got to get all the way to the bottom of the cell to clear that wax, or they'll just repair it. You need to leave that colony alone for the week. I mentioned that. 30 days is kind of the rough general idea after you've notched where you'll see queen cells. It's typically a little bit sooner than that. 27, 28 days, you're going to start to see eggs. Maybe sooner. Just depends on the weather they've experienced. Did they have, the queens have good sunny days in the 60s and 70s, then you're going to be fine. They'll be done sooner. If it's been a lot of rain, it's going to be later. But once they hit about 35 days, it's typically too late, and you're going to start to get laying worker. And you guys can talk about how to deal with laying workers. Everybody does it different. I just get rid of them and recombine the equipment with other colonies. Let's get into the third strategy so we don't run out of time, and that's mite control with post-solstice OTS. So just going back to that idea of why would we do this post-solstice? There's two things at play when we either kill the queen and make it queenless, or we make an artificial swarm and make the hive queenless. You are providing a 30-day brood break for that colony. And I'm getting ahead of myself. All colonies have or will get mites, we've mentioned. You can't ignore it for long. It's gonna start to play out. You'll see crawling bees and sickness and such even about right now into July, especially. And we want to somehow deal with that as naturally as possible. I've never used synthetic chemicals in my colonies. I just have never felt good about that. But I'm also not like a natural beekeeper where I just let them go. You just can't. You got to do something. So there's a mixture of things I do, the brood break and oxalic, and we'll get into that. So here's a strategy: brood breaks and oxalic, and you combine those. It's not only effective, it's efficient. So when you do a brood break, the second point there, you're disrupting the mite cycle. If you've read up on mites, they reproduce, they almost double every 13 days, nearly double. And so if you don't mitigate those mites, they're gonna outbreed the bees. But if you disrupt the mite cycle by not giving them any larvae to go in and lay eggs and reproduce, you're putting them in you're putting them on pause, more or less, all the while the bees are hatching out and giving more bees into the equation. Then that queen comes back and starts laying, and Mel says that the mites all dive back into the larva on the 5th day, right before they're capped. On the 8th day, sorry, right before they're capped. And there's too many mites inside those cells with the larva, and they starve, and you actually end up killing a lot of the mites. I don't think anyone's done a study that's verified that for sure scientifically. I know at the very least, I'm putting a pause on the mite cycle for me twice a year with just the brood break. And for 5 or 6 years, I went along with this just doing brood breaks, and I was able to do just fine, but I was seeing 40, 50% losses. And really that's all attributable back to weakness from mites. And I really felt like I needed to do better than that. And so what I did is mixed in oxalic vapor, which it's an organic chemical made from vegetables, leaves, rhubarb leaves, etc. And with a brood break, instead of 3 shots of oxalic, which most folks do because you need to take it into consideration the larva that's under cappings with the mites, oxalic doesn't get below the cappings. So you need to do 3 cycles of oxalic vapor if you do it normally. But with a brood break, on the 24th day, all the bees, even drones, have emerged from their cells and with all the mites with them. And you just wait till early morning or late in the evening when they're all in the colony, and you do 1 shot of oxalic vapor and you're done. You're going to kill 95% or better of the mites in that colony. And so that's what I've done the last few years as a quick and efficient and a successful way of mitigating the mites. I hope that makes sense. Skipping ahead. As well, if you're doing a post-solstice, if you're raising queens post-solstice, not only are you giving that brood break, not only are you shooting them with oxalic if it's your choice, you are also providing a queen that's going to lay eggs at a massive rate, unlike the colonies around them normally would. You know, they really ramp down a queen in July and August, an older queen, that she's hardly laying at all. And by doing that differently, you got all these young bees now going into fall and winter that aren't damaged by mites. Think about it. If you did it this normally, most of your bees have got mite damage, even if you've mitigated them with treatments going into fall and winter, and you're still going to see some disease issues. But now I'm going into winter with a young queen and all young bees that don't have much or any mite damage. And you just come out into spring with so much more healthier hives. This was my spring, no, this was last fall. Picture of my colonies in my backyard. Just to reiterate why oxalic, it's cheap. I can do it in just 1 shot. I only do this now in 1 shot in July or late June. Doesn't hurt the bees. I find it doesn't hurt the queens. While I'm rearing queens, I don't worry about that at all. With the brood break, you just need 1 dose, and it's a win-win. So with this method, someone asked what's considered an old queen. When I say old, I'm just saying it's an overwintered queen coming into my yard. I would call an old queen. I go into winter with all new queens that were just mated in end of June, July. So here's just a look at my yard in 2018-19 just to see this in practice. So I'll run through this quickly for time's sake. I wrapped up 38 hives. I prepped them for winter in fall of 2018, all with newly July mated queens. I winterized with the tar paper wrap. I put a sugar spacer on top. I put in, so it gives me space to put in sugar blocks later. I do have a little bit of upper ventilation, not much. And I do have insulated top covers. I use those year round, those B-Max high density foam covers. I just use them year round. Put on my mouse covers like everybody. So this is what it looks like. Tar paper. Here's my sugar rim. You can see the space, and that's late winter, early spring. I've got some sugar blocks up top. The clusters moved up. So 31 of 38 colonies survived into March, which was pretty decent. I noticed some beetles a couple years back. I don't know if you guys saw the same. I don't see any this year. It's just a weird cycle. I was feeding dry sugar on newspaper, and I wonder if that might have been the issue for extra beetles that I saw. We had a weird wet weather pattern that made a dent in brood rearing for me early, kind of like this year. In the spring of 2019, I was definitely not going to sell as many healthy nukes as usual because of the beetles. I just didn't feel good about some of them, so I canceled half my orders. Just giving you the down and dirty here. May 4th, I artificial swarmed that year. This year was much earlier. I sold 12 nukes and spot checked for mites. I did splits a week later on May 11th and destroyed and combined a few weak colonies I just didn't like. It left me with 27 queenless colonies with queen cells, so I didn't have a queen in my yard. Most of them were medium strength that year, some of them even weak. It just wasn't a great spring. May 25th, I did my oxalic dose. I don't even do that now in the spring. I just wait till about now. June 1st, 25 strong laying colonies. So I had about a 92% mating success rate with those colonies. I do a lot of rubbing of wax onto black foundation because I'm selling nukes. I'm getting rid of frames. I'm always having to build comb. This is vital if you're doing, trying to do a lot of splits. You need to make sure you got a lot of wax on your frames. Just a side note. So the summer of 2019, I made a small effort to sell some nukes, got 6 requests. So I artificial swarmed, well, actually I killed queens July 7th. Sold 6, the remaining were removed and killed. I banked 4 that year. So that was just 2 years ago. I banked 4 just for the heck of it. And I ended with 25 queenless colonies. July 14th, a week later on a Saturday, I split cells and bees into 40 colonies. I basically about doubled. Way too many bees. I'm never going to do that again. I just don't have the time. I gave a dose of oxalic around the 30th, a little bit early, but it was decent enough timing. August 10th, 36 of the 40 mated successfully, so that's about 90%. I do notice a little bit less success in the summer. I think that's because of insect pressure. I used 3 banked queens to raise that number to 39. So 3 of those banked queens made it. 1 just absconded, lost it. And so I newspaper combined 3 of those back. I don't even bother now this year. I got too many bees. So I sell nukes like this, put them in those Jester Easy nukes. They're really handy. Went into fall, all the colonies did well with honey, extracted some. I really don't do much honey, but it was a few hundred pounds. I don't remember, something like that. September colonies were progressing, all had 2 deeps, 2+ deeps. October, all the weights were nice, goldenrod coming in, done by October. There was 4 weak colonies which I fed. I shouldn't waste time. Those usually don't make it. Added sugar ins and got them prepped for winter. So that was like a full cycle of a year in my yard with the processes that I talk about. And so the outcomes for that year, I sold maybe a couple hundred jars of honey here and there, made a couple thousand. Was 18 nukes sold, about 3,000, raised a bunch of queens, of course, to do all those nukes. So those are worth a lot of money. If you start paying for those, And then I went into winter with the same number of healthy, robust bees as I started with. So there's a cycle of just maintenance that you can do by recombining or selling your bees with this process. So this was the yard just a couple days ago out back. Things are really strong this year. I'm worried about having too many bees and swarming, so we'll have to keep an eye on them. So I think for time's sake, let's take any questions. Feel free to maybe jump on audio if you got a question.
So John, next week you're going to kill every queen in your yard. Are you going to sell any of those?
I sold, there's just not a very high demand. I put out a note on the Northeast Ohio board and got a couple takers, but I've already done that process. So the last couple weeks I've been killing queens and splitting some of the colonies.
Wow.
So I do have 2 queen-right colonies, just some oddities. I picked up a swarm from somebody I shouldn't have taken, and I forget why I have the other queen-right colony, but everything else I killed, and they're all raising queens. Someone asks, what are you using to do oxalic treatments? I use that really nice ProVap tool. It's about $400, $300 now, I don't know. I do that because it's just a couple minutes at most per colony instead of 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. It adds up if you're doing 30 or 40 colonies. So it was worth it to me to spend a few $100 for that. ProVap. I have a little generator. Any other questions? All right. There's some info. It's in the slides. You can see it later when you guys pass around the PDF. But my email, feel free to contact me anytime there. And there's a Facebook group and my blog. I hardly ever write any posts, but there's a good archive of stuff there.
Great, John.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, just a little comment on a few questions, if you don't mind, if you guys still have time. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Go for it.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Mohammed, and thank you very much for John for presentation and Rob for organizing this. So yeah, I was just gonna mention, since you're talking about swarming, I bought a package and a Nuke hive from someone, and the Nuke was swarmed 3 times. The first one I lost it, and this is happening just in 1 month, this month, June. The first one I lost it because it was too high on a tree and it couldn't reach the swarm. And 2 just happened in, like, 1 yesterday and 1 this morning. So I caught the one yesterday. I got the box and everything and I put it together. It's calm right now. We got the second one just this afternoon, and the problem is, I have meeting, I'm working from home and trying to, taking time from so I got the swarms. Now I put them, and I would like from here to thank Randy. He helped a lot with, he's my mentor, and he helped with answering questions stuff. So thank you, Randy. I asked Randy about, like, placement of the swarm cells, like, and I was just like, kind of ask it again, just making sure that, is that a problem where you place your swarms, place it next to the box where they start from or stuff like that. And the second, was that another question? Anyway, I forgot that. I have the note here for myself. Anyway, I'll keep that for myself next time. About the link that you guys provided, I cannot access that PDF or whatever. It's asking me to sign for an app or something like that.
I'll make sure, and I'll work on that. Yeah, and get back to the guys, and they can let you guys all know by email, I'm guessing.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So you're asking about the placement of the cells that were built?
Yeah, well, Randy was, because I noticed, Randy talked about something called drifting, and I noticed that yesterday when I moved the hive, I see the bees of the package hive, which is normal, no problem, that no swarming happened there. They kind of go to their old, I just moved them like a couple feet from to the right on the same location. They're like 3 feet apart, the 2 hives. Now there's 3, and the next one is 4 now. They're gonna be like 1 foot apart from each other. But when I moved the package one a little bit, just 2 feet, I can see a bunch of bees is like circling in the original spot. And I think now they're back to, I was just thinking, is that like a normal, I mean, should you put the bees, the swarm next to the to the hive where they left from, or what's best practice, or just you don't care?
Once the key is, there's a couple things. You can set them right next to the parent colony, no big deal. The key is not moving them much after that, because once they orient on that spot, you don't want to move them too much. If you do need to move them, you just do it a few inches at a time every day until you get them to where you want. And then you're not going to have problems. The other key is making sure with the splits that there's a difference between the forager bees and the nurse bees. Nurse bees are just going to stick with that colony. The foragers are hit and miss. They're going to go wherever they kind of want. So the nurse bees are the ones that are on the brood, especially the open larvae. They're younger bees. They're not going out of the colony. If you have enough of those with the new splits, new starts, then you're going to be okay.
Thank you very much, Sean. Appreciate it.
So to download the presentation, when you click on this link, I know there's something that says get cloud app for free, but if you look at the bottom right of your screen, there's a download button, and when you click on that, it will download a PDF for you.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, maybe I'm doing it from a work computer. Maybe there's something else there. Okay, thank you.
So guys, with swarming, I think we've done a couple of presentations and we talked a lot about it. You gotta provide your queen with a lot of room. You know, this year was kind of difficult for new beekeepers because a lot of nectar flow, you know, a lot of nectar was flowing and they were backfilling, and you just have to inspect every week. I inspect every week and I haven't lost a colony to a swarm. And this year I had one swarm on me. It overwintered and I was planning on splitting it, and did an inspection on Saturday. I didn't see any cups. Apparently I didn't have my glasses on right. And then the following week, the queen was gone. And I had 7 queen cells on different frames. I moved them into different nukes. They were capped. And yesterday I checked on them and I have 2 mated queens, or I'm sorry, 1 mated queen and 1 virgin queen. And 1 queen I couldn't find. I don't know if she is on her mating trip or what, but the key is, you know, you got to provide them with a lot of space. And if you need to spin, in one instance, I helped somebody spin the nectar out. So he brought, I believe, 6 frames to my house, and we spin the nectar out, and then he went back and put them back in the hive just to provide enough room for the queen to lay. So always inspect, you know, do it every week. I know some people say you don't need to get in except for 10 to 16 days. Well, in 16 days, you know, a queen can hatch and swarm on you. So every Saturday morning, if you have time, or whatever day of the week, you know, get in there and inspect your colonies. And don't forget, we have mentors. Randy is leading the mentorship program. We have a lot of mentors out there. If you're struggling, don't feel embarrassed. You know, just send me an email or send an email to officers@summitbeekeepers.com, and that will go to all the officers, and we'll find somebody near you to help.
Yeah, the mentorship program is based on the neighborhood you live in. So northern people I group together, so you'll be connected with a neighbor possibly next door or down the street. And it is very useful. I've met Mohammed, spoke before, and we're always on the phone.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate it. You're helping a lot.
Yes, good.
Any other questions, guys?
Robert, one more thing about swarm. So the first swarm, the one I lost, I had some kind of weird thing happen. Again, I inspected. I added a you know, a box later after you know, the first loss. But just one thing happened to me when I with the first one, one that went to the higher branch, I couldn't reach it. I went quickly, inspected, and removed all the queen cells that I found there, and the bees came back from that. You know, that swarm came back to the cell, to the hive. I saw something online as someone who posted something that, you know, said, this is how I did exactly what I was talking about, what I did. You know, I didn't even watch that thing until later. And he was talking, I was like asking, like, you know, to confirm, is this, did you have something like this, like removing the cells and the swarm will come back to your hive? Do you guys heard about anything about this, or is it true? I've seen them, you know, with my eyes, you know, they came back. As soon as I removed, you know, as soon as I removed those those cells, they're back again. They're circling like a 50 circle sphere and back to the hive. But then they swarmed again, you know, after that. But I don't know. But I gave them room. I
What do you
removed
think,
the cells.
I don't think this is accurate, Mohammed, because once they swarm, the queen is gone. And the only time they will come back is if the queen didn't leave with them. And that's when they come back. But at that point, they're going to swarm, even when they come back. Because
Yeah,
the queen didn't leave with them the first time, I think a day or two later, they're going to take off again.
What you might be seeing is might have been multiple virgins in those swarms that are, when that happens, you'll get these little miniature swarms that get cast off and come back and forth, and it's just a mess. That might have been what happened. There might have been a lot of queens emerging all at once in that swarm. That's common.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you don't have any other questions, we can go ahead and end the meeting. John, thank you for the presentation. A lot of information. We really appreciate it. Just an overwhelming amount of information. I don't think I'm going to go kill all my queens, though. I don't have the heart to do it. So.
Yeah, just experiment with a couple, get the hang of it. Yeah.
So thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Nice to meet you all.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.